discussed quite a lot of ideas. I think we were up to, I'm not certain, but we were talking about your shopping list, getting ready for Yom Tov. If anyone wants, I could print a shopping list. I asked you to bring your shopping list with. What do you like to get? Whether it's food or clothing or gifts or treats, you want to make your Yom Tov extra special to the best of your ability. Now, I put up a picture here of a Kiddush. It's actually from our website, just a picture of what the Kiddush, the bracha, we look at having all types of delicacies. But on Yom Tov, on Shavuos in particular, there is a mitzvah to not only eat the ordinary meal, which would consist of wine and fish and meat, but also specifically to have milchiks. But I actually have to highlight for a moment a insight that while we are shopping for ourselves, we have to be considerate and thinking of others as well. I told you guys a story before Pesach about the brisker Rav, that he was once visited by a fellow who asked him if he's allowed to use milk for the 4 cups instead of wine. Now, generally speaking, from a halachic perspective, if you can't drink wine because you're allergic to it, then you could go with an alternative and perhaps you could drink a different beverage. So the rabbi asked him, are you allergic to wine? He said, no, just can't afford it. Well, can't afford in Jewish communities doesn't work as an excuse because we are very privileged as a community to have many organizations that will help people out, whether it's Chabad House here with our food parcels, or Yad Aron, or the Chevra Kadisha, or Meals on Wheels. I just listed 4 to you, and I'm sure in each shul, many shuls at least, have programs to help people in the community with their Yom Tov necessities. So you can't say I can't afford. I mean, you could. And in that case, one has to go to a communal fund to help them. Now, many people are embarrassed to do so. In this instance, the fellow came to Rabbi Soloveitchik, the brisker Rav, and said, what could he do? So once the rabbi asked him if he's allergic to it, just to see if a person's allergic, then yes, you could find an alternative. But if he's not allergic, then he has to drink grape juice or wine. So the rabbi gave him a large sum of money. After the man left, the shamash asked the Rav, why did you give him so much? If he can't afford wine, I understand you want to give him a little bit more. But why? You gave him an enormous amount, a lot more than he needs for wine. The rabbi said to his assistant, look, if he can't afford wine, right, and he was considering to drink milk, so pious like that, you think he was going to eat meat in the same meal he was going to drink milk? For sure not, right? So if he can't afford meat, who knows if he could afford fish and salad? And what about clothing for his wife and children? What about other things that he needs for the holiday? Maybe he's behind in rent. So I decided to give him this larger amount in order to help him cover his Yom Tov expenses. Like I said, the Gemara tells us that the Shabbos and Yom Tov expenses are not part of our allotted amount for the year. But nevertheless, people struggle with affording the necessities for the holiday. There's a story told about Rabbi Chaim Halberstam of Tzanz, known as a great Hasidic master. And he prayed late on the Erev Yom Tov afternoon, it was Shavuos afternoon, he prayed very late. And when he arrived home for lunch, he discovered that there were 4 wealthy members of his community waiting for him. They were waiting, they wanted to hear some deep Torah insights on Shavuos. And the rabbi said to them, in my previous years, I like to share with you deep mystical insights into the holiday. Today, I have no deep mystical insights, but I do have another problem on my hands. There's a gentleman who came to me in shul this morning. He has to marry off his young daughter. He can't afford the expenses for her wedding. And this is my current predicament. If you want to have lunch with me, you guys figure out how we're going to cover the expenses. I'll see you later. The 4 men worked out how they're going to cover the expense, and within minutes they said, Rabbi, we have this man's daughter's wedding covered. We'll take care of it. He said, okay, now we could sit down for a Yom Tov meal, and now we could talk and we could discuss Divrei Torah. What the rabbi taught us in this little story, to me, that stands out is that more important than the Torah study is the application of it, the lessons. So while we are getting ready for Yom Tov and preparing in every beautiful way possible and buying flowers and meat and wine and fish and all the necessities and new clothing and everything we need. Let's be considerate about the needs of others as well. And perhaps that's why we discussed many times the importance of having a pushka wherever we go, whether it's in the car or having a charity box in your office, in your kitchen as you prepare food, in your bedroom, in every place, to be considerate of others as well. And while you're preparing to buy nice delicacies for your own family, make sure you have for others as well. So now that you're taking care of others, let's think about what we have to do to take care of ourselves. Flowers reminds us of our happiness over receiving the Torah. In fact, I prepared a picture here. Let me just fast forward different pictures. This is the shul in Belz. Now, since my family on my father's side were Chabad, my mother's side originally Belz, I thought I should show you a picture. I was going to show you the whole picture, then I decided to zoom in. Actually, if you see the whole shul, it's a gorgeous picture, but I already copied only this picture into the slides. Actually, I had the other one too, but I deleted it. Figured I shouldn't have too many slides. The Belzer Shul in Jerusalem, it's a really beautiful shul. It looks like the temple. If you're ever in Jerusalem, it's worthwhile to pay a visit there. And many, many shuls decorate magnificently on Shavuos. Ironically, I don't know why it's not the Chabad custom to decorate as much. Not sure the reason, but be it as it may, I certainly share with you the custom of many. Also to decorate your home. My wife makes an effort to put it that my children get to pick flowers on Erev Shavuos for their rooms, and to decorate the house in flowers, and we decorate our bracha room at the shul, and we do put some flowers up in the shul. But I'm just showing you a picture of one of the shuls. This is a shul right down the block from my uncle's house, so whenever I'm in Israel, I daven at the shul, and you could just see the Aron Kodesh, the ark, how it's beautifully decorated in flower arrangements. Yes, Mayor? Kiryat Belz. Kiryat Belz, if you know the Gana Chayot HaYasham, the old zoo in Jerusalem, which my cousins live in the old zoo. They live, in fact, just on top of the lion's cage. But now with me coming to visit, I'm a different Ari. So the Gana Chayot HaYasham, it's just up the road from there. Listen, you can look at many pictures. I've seen a shul in Italy. I think that was the most magnificently decorated shul. I should have given you that picture. They have a video. They did Erev Shavuos last year, and they sent around the world, of their chazan and choir of this shul. I think it's in Florence, Italy. Beautiful, ancient synagogue. And the chazan and choir, they performed. But you see the floral arrangement. Just imagine going the whole aisle with these most beautiful flowers. So, if anybody's go to the florist, or if you have a beautiful garden, get as many nice flowers as possible. It reminds us how God made the barren Sinai desert blossom. And of course, flowers bring us joy and happiness. So we decorate our homes and shuls with as many flowers and floral arrangements to beautify our receiving the Torah and to express our joy. And the greenery that Mount Sinai was blossomed with. In fact, I have a medrash in front of me. There's a medrash that says a king sent his workers to pick the fruits in an orchard. Actually, that reminds me of one more reason before I read this medrash to you, is the harvest season. That Shavuos is the harvest season and Bikurim, so that's all part of why we decorate with flowers, because remember, every Jewish holiday is connected to an agricultural season as well. So because Shavuos is the Bikurim, when we would bring our first fruits to the temple, that's why people bring lots of fruits to the shul. For all those who are going to shul, if you're coming to our shul and have fruit arrangements and floral arrangements, please bring them along so we can decorate it as beautifully as possible. Wherever you'll be, decorate your shul, decorate your home. So let me read this medrash to you. The medrash says, a king sent his workers to pick the fruits in an orchard, but the orchard was filled with thorns. The king was about to have the orchard flattened when one rose was found. For the one rose, the king saved the entire orchard. The Medrash says, similarly, God was prepared to destroy the world after finding that 26 generations there weren't any righteous people. And then he found that we were prepared to receive the Torah, and God saved the world in their merit. So says the Medrash, this is another reason why we adorn our homes with flowers to remind us of this midrashic analogy that we bring beauty to the world. King Solomon in Shir HaShirim has a beautiful passage Basi legani achaisi kala. God says, I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. Oftentimes we look around the world, it appears like a jungle, filled with all types of problems, thorns. I mean, we were talking about the media the other day. If it bleeds, it leads, and all the problems that the world has. Oy vey. Well, oy vey is one perspective. Or we could say, well, God needs gardeners to tend to the garden, right? Each of us, it's our job to tend to the garden, to make it look beautiful. Because indeed, the world should not be seen as a jungle, but rather we should see the world for the beautiful place it is. And because on Shavuos, God gave us the Torah. So here's another reason to realize what's my purpose as God's partner in this world, to beautify this world. That's my job. Well, each of us has to do our part. So the trees remind us also to pray for our fruit-bearing trees, because God makes judgments about the productivity of fruit-bearing trees on Shavuos, according to a great-grandfather of mine known as the Magen Avraham. That's what he said, and therefore that's another reason why people bring fruits. The reason, somebody just messaged me, the reason why, okay, I guess this is one of the reasons. What does he say? He says, because it's become a Christian custom to decorate with trees on their holidays, that's why some communities stopped the decorations on Shavuos. So that could be, pardon? Is that what the Gross said? Okay, so Stephen says that's attributed to the Vilna Gaon. That because, now the only thing, I'm not arguing with the Vilna Gaon, God forbid. The only thing I would say is, Christians also believe in Mashiach, right? They have their belief in Mashiach, and we have our belief in Mashiach. We're not going to stop believing in Mashiach just because Christians do. And just because Christians, have other beliefs, it doesn't make us stop our beliefs. But nevertheless, the Gra was a very holy rabbi, and it's worthwhile to hear his reason of why some communities do not decorate, including Chabad. In Chabad, we decorate our homes with flowers, but not as much the shul. So, we take a balanced approach in my shul. We have a little bit, not too much, right? But at home, for sure, we have as many flowers as we possibly can. It reminds me of 2 flower jokes. If anyone has any more flower jokes, please tell me. So one was, a guy walks into the flower shop, and he asks the florist, he's looking around, he says, I really need the right flower. So the florist says, for who? He says, this is for my wife. So, well, tell me what you did, I'll tell you which flower you need. The other one is the sad-faced fellow. He walked into a flower shop early one morning, and the clerk was ready to take his order for a funeral piece based on the look on this guy's face, but soon he realized that his assumption was wrong. So when the fellow asked for a basket of flowers sent to his wife for their anniversary, he was quite surprised. He asked him, and what day is the anniversary going to be? He said, it was yesterday. Schön gewählt. Okay, one more comes to mind. Fine. The barber, was it the barber? Yeah, the barber decided he was in a good mood. And so when a priest walked in, a baker walked in. He asked the baker, he said, to the baker, today's a good day, I'm going to give you a free haircut. The baker was so pleased. The next day, he comes to the shop and he has a dozen bagels from the baker. Wow, it's so nice, the baker sent me all these pastries. I'll be nice again, pay it forward. And the next day, he's nice and happens to be a florist. And the florist sends him a dozen flowers. This is incredible. The next day, he gives a rabbi a free haircut. And the next day, there's a dozen rabbis there at all asking for free haircuts, of course. Okay, so speaking of haircuts, I thought about this joke because of the flowers, but the haircuts too. It's very interesting. Okay, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh, so we don't do a haircut Rosh Chodesh. In the Chabad tradition, we do our haircuts only Erev Shavuos. Unless you have a wedding, then you do it 3 days before. This year, Erev Shavuos is on Shabbos. You would do it starting tomorrow night only, Thursday night. Okay, so you'll still see me in my Langahar till then, and we'll see if I get a chance, Erev Yom Tov, to get a haircut. Otherwise, Maybe next week. Okay, what other customs? I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole shopping list unless there's something specific anybody wanted to mention. Who said Erev Tashilin? No, there's no Erev Tashilin this year. What else? Anything else in the shopping or preparation perspective? There's a lot that has to be prepared, and make sure you take the time to prepare for Yom Tov accordingly. Something that I always mention about Shabbos, but I think it's relevant to Yom Tov as well. Does? Chadash. I don't know if that's usually after Pesach. The question about Chadash, yeah. It's nice to have guests. It's interesting that I still have people who are concerned about COVID, and I've had some requests. People ask, is your shul dinner going to, even right here, is your shul dinner going to be COVID compliant? I don't know how to define COVID compliant. When you're sitting down for a dinner, naturally your mask comes off. So it's nice to have guests, but if you are COVID concerned, then maybe you could do socially distanced or do things like that, and that could work. Yes?
Just a hint from experience.
Yeah.
To be COVID compliant at a dinner,
yeah.
Your guests should sit about 1 to 1.5 meters apart.
If you have a huge room with not too many people, that could work. But not exactly. Exactly. So the question is to what degree and we're going to be COVID compliant. After all, we are not a young crowd right here, maybe young at heart. So I certainly advise your precaution and your discretion, and you're taking whatever steps you need to be more careful. There's no doubt about that you got to be prudent, but it's just not realistic to everyone. And certainly for those who are not as concerned, then it's time to start moving forward. I'm not telling everybody to do that, but if you are concerned, then do it at home and invite some people over, and not a lot of people over, but make sure you make it a special and enjoyable experience. And so you want that the Yom Tov should be enjoyable and special and pleasant and delightful. And as we discussed yesterday, to buy extra delicacies that are different. When you're involved and extensively involved with preparations for a big event, then sometimes we get stressed out about getting everything done on time and to the desired standard that we want. And sometimes it can get people a little bit upset and a little bit angry. And sometimes Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov can become a little bit stressful at home. And therefore, one of the important things to keep in mind is to avoid that. Even when we would get stressed at home, sometimes my father would remind us that you're not allowed to light a flame on Shabbos. Right? The Torah says, "Lo savaru eish b'chol ma'ishrei seichem b'yom Shabbos." You should not kindle a flame in all your dwellings on Shabbos. So my father, of blessed memory, would tell us the flame of discord, of friction, of fighting should not be lit in the home. So while we do light the Shabbos candles on Friday evening, and then, of course, Yom Tov evening, which we'll discuss in a moment, which has to be delayed, we are going to light later. But certainly you want to have light in the home. But which light? A light of joy, of pleasantness. That's the light you want to have. But God forbid, you don't want to have a fire that is a fire of discord, a fire of anger, a fire of unpleasantness. That's not the fire. Okay, so Erev Yom Tov, get the house ready. There's lots of ways you could do that. Make sure, your typical things. You're having a special guest called Yom Tov, right? Make sure the house is beautifully prepared. Think of all the different ways that you're going to make sure that you are prepared. Whether it's food, getting all the delicacies that you would traditionally get for Yom Tov. Make sure you have wine. Make sure you have candles to light the Shabbos candles. Make sure something that's important to keep in mind. Because you cannot light a candle from scratch on Yom Tov, and this year Yom Tov is coming from Shabbos, most ideal would be is to get a 48 or 72 hour candle. You could get these at Kosher World. Actually, ideally, just get that tall one so it doesn't go out. Because on Pesach, I realized that some of these candles that are advertised as 48-hour candles did not last 48 hours. So you could go with this. There's a 7-day candle that sell at Kosher World. It's not expensive. I mean, whatever. Maybe it is 40 rand. Okay, and you have a existing flame. But I saw this question asked to Rabbi Groner. What if you don't want to leave your oven or stove on for all of Shabbos and Yom Tov? Then he said you could certainly ask a Gentile, a guy, to light to turn it on for you. But then you have to make sure to put the food in, that you're involved in the cooking process. So if you have a domestic helper who can help out by turning on your fire for you on Saturday night. Of course, on Shabbos, there's no lighting fires. But on Yom Tov, you're allowed to kindle a fire in order to cook and prepare for Yom Tov itself. And going back to the Erev Tavshilin question that was asked, Erev Tavshilin is only relevant when you're going from a Yom Tov day into Shabbos. This year, you're not going from Yom Tov into Shabbos, but you are going from Shabbos into Yom Tov. So you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos altogether. You're not allowed to prepare from Shabbos to non-Shabbos. So you're going to have to start your preparations quite late on, Matzah Shabbos, right, when Shabbos is out. So you'll probably start your Yom Tov meal quite late on Saturday night. What's that? You lay it after. Well, there are tricks to this. I could tell you some tricks, but it's not ideal. I'll tell you what the trick is. No, you shouldn't do on Shabbos for after Shabbos, but you can set on Shabbos for Shabbos. You can prepare for Shalosh Shudas and prepare a little bit extra. But again, that's shtick, and that's usually only done if you're having too many people that really going to be overwhelmed. Okay, but the idea of Erev Tavshilin is the only exception when you're allowed to cook on a Yom Tov day for Shabbos is when Yom Tov is on a Friday. When Yom Tov is on a Friday, which is not the case this year, because you need fresh food for Shabbos, and because you didn't have the time to prepare it otherwise, so you will be allowed to prepare on Friday for Shabbos, but that's not relevant at all in Shavuos this year, so that's not something to really take into consideration. But nevertheless, you do have to prepare it always possible. So regarding a fire, you don't want to keep your stove top on, especially if it's electric and that. So then, in that case, you can have somebody light it for you on Saturday night. Best case, is to pre-light a 72-hour candle, or a 48-hour candle, or a 7-day candle. Okay. And this way you'll have a existing flight. Also, shouldn't forget this, is because there is Yizkar. And many people have a tradition that they light a candle for Yizkar for the second day. Second day this year is Monday. So if you have a pre-existing flame, you can light it on Sunday night, Monday. Or you could just light that Yizkar candle in advance. Like I said, for $40, you get yourself a tall candle the last 7 days. You don't have to worry about that going out. And the reason I mention that is because on Pesach, we bought 48-hour candles, and they didn't last all 48 hours.
You're going to need 2 candles. You're going to continue lighting your normal.
Then you can take 48, you can take a 24-hour candle, but will it last 24 hours till the end of Yom Tov? Yes. No, that could be a Yortzei candle. There's nothing wrong with lighting a Yortzei candle. You can. Why not? Yeah. What's your question? No, Yizkar's on Monday. In Israel, Yizkar's on Sunday. In diaspora, Yizkar's on Monday.
So they just said that you have to Yotza candle before. You can take a flame from Yotza candle, not have a candle.
On Yom Tov, not on Shabbos.
I was just gonna say
Yes,
that.
on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Okay, how many challahs do you need?
2, 4, 6.
2, 4, 6. Well, don't forget you have Friday night, you need 2. Let's say 1, because you could always add an extra, right? Just the minimum. You need Friday night, you need for Shabbos lunch, you need for Saturday night, you need for Sunday lunch, you need for Sunday night, you need for Monday lunch, and you need an extra one, or Sudash, you use 2 whole ones? Lachemish or no? Okay, you need a minimum of 7 challahs. Minimum 7 challahs. Okay, or challah rolls. So get a lot of challah. Okay.
Kind of rolls you can
You need salt to dip it into. You need, don't forget cheese. I put that somewhere here in our slide. I'll go back to that. I'm going in the wrong order here. Cheese, milchiks. We'll talk more about that. Each of these slides we'll discuss in a moment. I'll go backwards. You need wine or grape juice. Yeah. What else? Okay, fresh flowers. Don't forget. Okay, you want to get creative, fancy, get some fancy candlesticks. You need your becher. You need all the stuff you would need to make your house beautiful. But don't forget, making the house beautiful means it should be tidy, it should be clean, it should be nice, it should be extra special for Yom Tov, and do all the things that are necessary. You can, and it's customary to groom yourself before a holiday begins, and this is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. So those who don't keep their beards beyond Sfira, you're welcome to take care of that. Your nails. Get your manis and petties and whatever else you need. Ladies and gents. Okay? Your makeup, your perfume, your holiday best clothing. Ich weiß, whatever it is. In men have a custom of going to the mikveh Erev Yom Tov. Last week, we had no water at all in Santon for about 3 days. In my area, there was a burst pipe. Thank God for the mikveh, right? Okay, so make sure you do all those things you need to do. Now, Friday evening, you're going to light the candles. Ordinary time this week is about 5:06, 5:07. But Saturday night, Shabbos is regular. It's going to be chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot, everything it takes to make a regular, beautiful Shabbos. But Friday night, Saturday night. Saturday night, when Yom Tov begins. So we extend, we daven Ma'ariv late. Late means at least after the stars come out. On a regular night, these days at my shul, we do Mincha 5:15, Ma'ariv 5:30. You could daven Ma'ariv before the stars come out. Even on Shabbos we do that. We daven at our shul, Kabbalah Shabbos on a Friday night now, 5:45 in the winter. That's before the stars come out. But you don't do that on the first night of Shavuos, especially this year that it's a Saturday night, but any year. The reason is because it has to be 7 complete weeks. So we'll discuss that in a moment. Somebody's asking about the candles. Oh yeah, I'm sure we touched on that. We talked about the candles many times. That's just a message coming through. Okay, so why do we light candles today? This person's asking. I'll just touch on it very briefly. I'm sorry, because we discussed this in the past. Today, thank God, we have Escom. Oh, that's why we light candles, right? Yes, you have electric lights that could illuminate your home, but candles, back in the old times, particularly oil, was a time-honored way of lighting your home in general, but specifically when it came to Shabbos, Jewish women would light candles. Yes, men could light the candles as well. Who was the one who told me that last week? I should emphasize that men could also light. Yes, men. I don't know. Somebody was here at the shir told me, make sure you say that men could too. Yes, men can as well, but it's a woman's mitzvah. If there's no woman in the house, then a man does it. Okay, but historically, you would have a special lamp, special for Shabbos and Yom Tov, meaning you didn't use your regular weekday candelabra even in the days before electricity existed, because you wanted to give a special honor to Shabbos and Yom Tov. So as well, today we illuminate our homes with a special light for Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, some people are particular to use a wax candle or oil. Many people I see use oil, and oil perhaps because of the temple. I don't know exactly why using oil, but many people do use oil. But it doesn't, either way, the idea is lighting candles, and I think it's about extending a mitzvah that always was. Now, obviously, if somebody's in a hospital where you can't light a candle, then you could use an electric light, but that's the custom. It's always been a Jewish woman's mitzvah to light the candles. First of all, it tells us when you light a candle that you could experience Oneg Shabbos or Oneg Yom Tov, which means the delight, the pleasure, and the experience. Because, they say people eat with their eyes, you see the food, the presentation. It's important that's nice. Well, it's more peaceful and it's more pleasant when you can see what's in front of you. So we have the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos and Kavod Shabbos, and certainly for Yom Tov as well. Oneg is the pleasure that you enjoy when you see things, and Kavod is it adds honor. You make your home more beautiful, more elegant, more romantic, whatever you want to call it. So certainly, and talking about preparation, depending what type of candles you have, but silver was always traditional to have silver candlesticks. One of the ways of preparing for Shabbos and Yom Tov, and this is something that I used to do as a kid, it was one of my chores, I shouldn't call it a chore, one of my duties was to polish the silver candlesticks. My mother had 2 big candelabras with 5 candles in each, besides, because there were 10 of us. So she would light 10 candles. And these 2 authentic, beautiful silver candelabras, they get real silver tarnishes. Probably fake silver does too. There must be worse. Now there must be versions of silver that don't tarnish. No, nothing.
Things like this.
Today nobody's come up with one.
Gold.
Either way, but the point is that's another way of preparing is to make sure that you will polish it to make sure it's beautiful. And yes, again, if a man is living alone, you should light the candles as well. Even when there's a woman in the home, halacha encourages the man to be actively involved, and therefore you could set up the tray of candlesticks. My father, bless his memory, I don't know why I don't do it. I should. My father would light all the candles. It makes it easier to light them if they're pre-lit. And then he would singe them with his finger like that. He would extinguish them that way. All right, any particular questions about the candles? Nothing. Okay, let's move on. What else comes to mind about Yom Tov preparations? Let's see what slides I put here so we can know what to discuss. Yes, 3 full days: Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Reading them again.
Yeah, we'll get there. I put it into my list of things that I wanted to discuss. Let me just find my notes again, what I was going to talk about, because I lost it. Okay, so Saturday night we daven at least a little bit after stars come out. So call it 6 o'clock at least, and therefore you're going to make sure that it's 7 complete weeks of the Omer counting. That's the reason why you daven late on a Shavuos night. The first night Shavuos, always the davening.
Even if it's a Yom Tov coming off the Shabbos anyway, Pesach or Sukkot.
Yeah.
You wait until he stars out, because otherwise you're not davening
on the Yom Tov. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's another good point.
So you wait until, normally what I've seen happen is a Rav gives a drosha at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
About 10 past 4,
exactly.
6, depending, and then after that.
Yeah, so there is a mitzvah bringing Shabbos in early, but with Yom Tov, you're going to be saying a special prayer, particularly related to the Yom Tov, but particularly when it comes to Shavuos. There's a story, they say it about Shabbos, but I'll apply it to the Yom Tov too, why not? About the Heilige Ruzhiner, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, that when he was a child, he was once playing outdoors on a Friday afternoon, and his brother said, "You got to hurry up, it's almost Shabbos." So he looked up to the sky, and he says, "Yes, it's nearly Shabbos." So his brother said, what are you looking up? Now, obviously, you could see the sun is setting. But he said, can't you see the profound change that overcomes the skies when Shabbos arrives? That was his word. There's a whole difference. Like the story you may have heard many times from the Gemara about Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He once had a Roman official over for a Shabbos meal. And the Roman official really enjoyed the sumptuous. It was a Shabbos lunch, so they served cholent. And he said, it was the most delectable cholent, the stew, it tastes incredible. And he asked for the recipe, and Rabbi Yehuda's wife gave him exactly the ingredients of what she does and how she makes it. And he tried, and he copied it exact, and his chefs, they just couldn't get it right. So eventually he said, "Rabbi, what ingredient did you miss out?" And the rabbi reviewed the recipe with him exactly as his wife gave it. And he said, "I gave you everything, and if you're following it exactly, I think the problem is, if it's not Shabbos, it's just not cholent." A certain spice called Shabbos, the Gemara says. And you could say the same thing about Yom Tov. So what's going to be different in your prayers is that in the Shemona Esrei, it's not a long davening. It's shorter than the past 7 weeks because there's no Omer counting. But in the Shemona Esrei, we change the Tehillas Hashem is page 331, where you are going to read there's a Yom Tov Shemona Esrei for the holidays, and the central theme of the Yom Tov Shemona Esrei is our gratitude to God for choosing us from among all the nations. That's why we sing the song. Ata v'chartanu mikol ha'amim. Oh, after Oyisanu, Viratzi Sabanu, Viraimam Tanu, Mikol Hashoynais, Vikidash Tanu, B'mitzvaysecha, V'keirav Tanu, Malkeinu Lavodasecha, V'shimcha Agadol V'Akadosh, Oleinu Karasa. The theme of that is that God chose us. What does it mean we're the chosen people? That God gave us this holiday of Shavuos, upon which we received the Torah. And so we ask Hashem to grant us blessings of life, of joy, of merriment in this day, that we should utilize this blessing of the Torah to implement it in our life. That, you selected us, you chose us for this, and we're asking God that we should utilize this blessing. And so it's a blessing we say on all holidays, but particularly on Shavuos, because this is the holiday, of course, that we received the Torah. There is, if you look inside the Siddur, you'll see there's other blessings. For example, the blessing of Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazemanim. What does that mean? That God sanctifies Israel and the times. Now, on Shabbos, what do we say? Mekadesh HaShabbos, that God sanctifies Shabbos, right? God alone sanctifies Shabbos because it happens every week without any human contribution. Every week, every Friday when the sun sets, the holiness of Shabbos spontaneously descends on the world. But Yom Tov is Mekadesh Yisrael Ve'azmanim. We, the Jewish people, sanctify Yom Tov because it is determined by the day of the month, which we blessed last Saturday in Shul, right? We had Shabbos Mevarchim. We blessed this month. So we're the ones who sanctify this day. In ancient Israel, the high Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, were the ones that would declare the opening of a new month on the basis of the testimony of witnesses who saw the new moon. Since the new moon depends on the Jewish court, so we thank God for sanctifying us, the Jewish people, which empowers us to sanctify the days of the month and to dictate in turn which day the holiday Yom Tov would fall out on. On a spiritual level, though, this means that Shabbos is a gift that we received from above, but Yom Tov is a gift that we give to God from below. It comes from within and is extra precious in that sense that we are the ones who sanctify it. And on that note, we think about diaspora. That it might seem like a deficiency that we're outside of Israel and we have to therefore celebrate an extra day of Yom Tov. Oy vey. But we could see it in another way, that only in the diaspora there's a certain advantage that we could take an ordinary weekday and make an extra Yom Tov out of it. So this is something that we are able to do. We're taking a Sunday and we're turning it into a holiday. But God empowered us to do so. Okay, you could still see on the screen Kiddush, because one of the special Shabbos moments that I enjoy every Friday night is when we sing Shalom Aleichem, we welcome the angels. I see my children as the angels and bless them, and sing Eshet Chayil, sing the praises of our better half, the Akeret Habayit, the pillar, the foundation of their home, the Jewish woman. But on Yom Tov, we do not sing these melodies. Why? Because unlike the Shabbos Kiddush, which is a biblical obligation, Kiddush on Yom Tov is a rabbinic enactment. So yes, there are laws of Kiddush that are applied, but we don't sing Shalom Aleichem. Also, I don't know if there's any source of angels accompanying you home on Yom Tov as we have on Shabbos. Shabbos is called a Kala, a bride, and that's perhaps another reason why we sing Eshet Chayil on Shabbos, but we don't do so on Yom Tov. Now, Yom Tov Kiddush on Saturday night, there's a order to it. It is called Yak Nehaz. You ever heard that word? What does it mean? Doesn't mean anything. It's an acronym. I should have put this up there. Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zaman. It's an acronym for the wine, the Kiddush, meaning we say a blessing on the wine. Kiddush is the sanctification of the day. Ner, we say a blessing on the candles. Havdalah, we differentiate, we distinguish between two types of holy days. We know there's a difference between Shabbos, which is a holy day, inherently holy from above, whereas Yom Tov is holy because we sanctified the day. So there's a difference. And on an ordinary Saturday night, we have a ceremony of Havdalah in which we say there's a difference between a holy day of Shabbos and a weekday. On Saturday night, when it's transitioning into Yom Tov, we are going to differentiate between the two types of holiness. And then Zman, we sanctify the day itself. Yes?
Why in the afternoon does lighting the candles come off the Kiddush?
Because ladies do light the Kiddush before. We're not talking about the candle lighting of Yom Tov. The Ner is the fire of Havdalah. Bari Ma'ori Ha'esh. Okay. So, good question. And if you didn't ask, I wouldn't be able to give you that answer. Because it's a different candle lighting. So, if I could remind us, Saturday night, ladies light the candles before Kiddush. Whether before or after you go to shul doesn't matter. It should be. Let me just emphasize. Only after. No, there's no Havdalah because there's no Havdalah. So you say Baruch Hamavda ben Kaddish l'Kaddish. Yes, you do say those words. But you will light after the stars come out, not before. Around 6, after 6 p.m. Not before 6 p.m. to light your candles. The second day, also. Yes, very good. Yep. Okay, just customs of the challah, of the becher. You notice a lot of bechers have a rim on top like that. Besides from making it easier to pour it out, it's also because there's a custom to fill our cups to the very top because we want the blessings to be overflowing. As King David says in Psalm 23 of Tehillim, Koisi Revaya, my cup overflows. Or in ancient English, which until like a year or two ago, everyone spoke, my cup overfloweth. Now we're changing it out, okay? But as you can see here, it's a silver goblet. It's nice to have a very special goblet designated for a mitzvah. Personally, I don't love the taste, certainly not of the silver-plated ones. It tastes horrible. So I have a glass becher. I have my own mishagas. I make, I like my own becher. But if you're having people over, it's nice to make the bracha on a... Also because of being COVID conscious, personally I was always conscious about this. I don't drink from the cup myself right away. I first pour into other cups. What's that? I know, I agree, but I agree with you, but most people do the opposite. Ich verstehe nicht, but certainly I emphasize this post-COVID. Before COVID, I always was like that, just the way I grew up. Yes, Ronnie? I know. You could. Your health comes first. Absolutely. If you feel there's a sakanat nefashot, that it's a danger to your health to drink from what somebody else drank first, I wouldn't drink it. I'm grossed out of that. It's my personal mishigas. Offending your host? No, we live in an era of diseases. We're coming post a pandemic. So, and some people say we're not not some people. We know we're not post the pandemic yet. Just because there are still people dying of COVID. So you have every right to be careful, and people should be considerate and pour it out first. I bought myself a few years ago a nice, beautiful, not myself, my guest really, a nice fountain in which we pour the wine and it overflows into, and it's a nice way to pour it to every guest. So it could pour it to all the cups at once instead of having to go cup by cup by cup. But the point is, yes, you certainly should be conscientious of other people's. Pardon? It's a problem to clean it. Why? Well, we wound up going through a few fountains. So, okay, in the Kiddush, we describe Yom Tov as Mikra Kodesh. What does Mikra Kodesh mean? A holy convocation. Right? It's called holy, unlike Shabbos, which is inherently holy. Mikra Kodesh means it's called holy. Shabbos is transcendent and cannot lower itself into the world. It's a day that's above nature. Right? There were 6 days God created the world with laborious work. Of course, for God it wasn't a strain, but the point is there were 6 days of creation, and the 7th day is inherently holy. Yom Tov is not as transcendent as Shabbos. Yom Tov could be on a weekday, as it is this year. So on Yom Tov, we could summon holiness down into the world. We make the day holy, whereas Shabbos is inherently holy. In the Kiddush, we say, The Kiddishanu b'mitzvahs of God sanctifies us with His commandments. Okay? Kiddishanu also, as we discussed in yesterday's shir, is marriage, is a betrothal. So as we say these words, we reflect on the fact that God betrothed us at Mount Sinai by giving us the Torah. The Torah was the marriage contract between us and God in this relationship. Okay, I want to talk about the 2 loaves. And which picture has that? 2 loaves. We know that halachically speaking, you have to have 2 whole loaves of bread, 2 challahs for Kiddush. And that has to do with the Lechem Mishnah, with the double portion of manna that the Jewish people would receive on a Friday. But I saw a fascinating talk from the Rebbe that I wanted to share with you. So let me just put it on the screen and we'll look at it very briefly. It says here, the Torah's command that Shabbos and holidays must be a time of pleasure for the Jewish people does not mean that only the soul should derive spiritual pleasure from Shabbos or the holiday. The body must also derive pleasure from Shabbos or the holiday. Moreover, the primary objective of this mitzvah of pleasure is specifically to refine the body. So therefore, says the Rebbe, because the body naturally derives pleasure from eating and drinking, the Torah says that the obligation to take pleasure on Shabbos is facilitated through eating. It is only in this way that the pleasure of Shabbos can truly permeate and refine the body. Fasting in order to repent and so forth can bring pleasure to the soul, but does not bring pleasure to the body. Even if someone is refined to the point that fasting does not cause bodily suffering, and even provides the body with the sanctification of bringing pleasure to the soul, nevertheless, this is not a natural pleasure for the body. Rather, it is a result of the soul forcing the body to deny its basic nature, even if it is a holy and refined body. So, this is telling us that on Yom Tov, we are to engage, maybe even indulge in good food. The weight does not come on Yom Tov. It's only when you step on the scale 3 days later, after Saturday, Sunday, Monday, fressing away, then you'll see the weight on the scale. Now, yes, the challah reminds us of the manna, so why on Yom Tov? Well, Yom Tov also, they wouldn't collect, so there was a double portion of manna that fell for Yom Tov too. But this is also one of the reasons for the custom of covering the challah during Kiddush, because the man would fall between 2 layers of dew, one above it and one beneath it. So that would keep it clean and fresh. So when we cover our challah and we have the challah board below it, or a tablecloth below it, and a challah cover above it, we are reminded of the way that God delivered the manna to us. And remembering the manna reminds us that just as God provided for our ancestors in the desert, so does Hashem provide for us now. We don't provide for ourselves through our own efforts. God provides for us through our efforts. There are people who work hard and still don't succeed. It's God's blessing. On Shabbos and on Yom Tov, when we abstain from work and appear to lose money, it's important to remember that our income comes from God. And I'm reminded of a story of Rabbi Aryeh Levine, who was known as the Tzaddik of Jerusalem. He passed away in the 1950s or 60s. But there was a particular shop that was open on Shabbos, and it annoyed many of the residents of Jerusalem. And you can imagine how he became dafka. You know what dafka is? Lahachas. You know, you're telling me to close, and there are particular people who get a little bit zealous and throw stones like a Shabbos. That didn't in any way convince him to close his shop on Shabbos. But one day, Rabbi Aryeh Levine walked by on a Shabbos and was staring in the shop that was busy with lots of customers. And the shopkeeper came out and said, "Yes, Rabbi, how can I help you?" The rabbi said, "I'm just looking." "So what are you looking at?" He says, I'm looking at envy at you. I'm just coming to terms with understanding your challenge of why you don't close on Shabbos. You're so busy, you have so many customers. And I don't know if I was in your position and I had a shop that was so busy on Shabbos, I don't know if I would close it either. I know that it's God's commandment, and I can understand that it's a tough challenge. And the man said to the rabbi, "I want to thank you for your empathy, because you're the first person who looked at it that way. Everyone else sees me, as a desecrator of Shabbos, as a bad Jew." And this rabbi was able to convince this man to close his shop on Shabbos by empathizing with him. We have to learn to have that empathy. And when we close, when we abstain from our work on Shabbos, we are realizing that just as God provided for the Jews in the desert and provided their manna, gave them a double portion on Shabbos because they couldn't collect on Shabbos, so too God provides for us. Even if, unfortunately, yesterday I was debating with a particular guy from my shul who said to me, he can't come to shul on Monday because it's a work day. And I say, but it's a holiday, it's Yom Tov. I'm sorry. And we have to understand, maybe I have to be a little bit more empathetic and realize it's a struggle, it's a challenge. People have to provide for their families. They don't realize. But that's the idea of having the double portion, is to remind ourselves that God is going to provide for our needs. And so, covering the bread at Kiddush, we discussed many times in the past, is saving it the shame as well. Remember the story of the rabbi who, I told it to you too many times, I'm not going to tell it to you again. You remember which one? You haven't heard it, but there's people on the screen who have. Okay, the story in short goes that according to halacha, when we have bread and wine on our table, we should recite the blessing on the bread over the blessing of the wine. So if you're having lunch here and I give you grape juice and I give you bread, which one should you make a blessing on first? The bread. Why? Because of the Shivas Aminim, the 7 kinds the land of Israel is blessed with. The Torah describes it as Eretz, Chita, Sa'ara, Geffen, a land of wheat, barley, grapes, pomegranates, yes, all 7 kinds. But remember, wheat came before grape, and therefore we eat in that sequence of the bread first. The story goes, why? Sorry, that's the order. The story goes that there was a particular Yid who, I'm forgetting one part to tell you. The part is that on Shabbos we have a mitzvah to make Kiddush. And because we have a mitzvah to make Kiddush, this will have to repeat the story from time to time, otherwise I forget myself. Because we have a mitzvah to make Kiddush, we cover the challah so as not to embarrass the bread, because Kiddush on Shabbos or Yom Tov will precede the bread. Otherwise, when you're eating lunch now, if I were to give you wine, you're going to have the bread before the wine. Only Shabbos do we change that order up, but we cover the challah so as not to embarrass it, that it's being, becoming second fiddle. So the story goes that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was once visiting a particular Jew for Shabbos. This guy, his wife set the table magnificently, but she forgot to cover the challah. And he started to shout and scream and yell at her, "How dare you embarrass us in front of this great holy rabbi?" So the rabbi said, "Hold your horses. Why do we cover the challah altogether?" And he said, he knew the answer, so as to not to shame it, right? So the rabbi said, wait a second. You think the challah has feelings and emotions, that it's going to be embarrassed, that it's... No, we cover the challah to remind ourselves that if we are meant to be considerate and sensitive to the feelings of the bread, how much more so do we need to save shame from our fellow human beings, especially our spouse and our loved ones? So obviously challah doesn't have feelings. But the rabbi was telling us what our sages want to impart is this lesson, that if something as inanimate as bread has to be treated with such consideration, how much more so we should be on guard not to embarrass or hurt another person. So that's the point of the... Oh, that is going to be represented by the 2 meals that we have, a milchig meal and a fleishig meal. So the 2 meals, I'll get to that now in a second. Okay, I'll actually answer that question, because yes, you're always going to have a nice big meal, but on Shavuos, as you know, whether it's at night or by day, most people do it by day, but many shuls do it at night as well, are going to have 2 separate meals. And the reason for that is because unlike any other Yom Tov or Shabbos, when you were supposed to have a meal, on Shavuos, there's shnei halach. There were 2 loaves of bread that were offered in the temple, and to commemorate those 2, we have a double meal. So how do you show that? You distinguish it by having 2 distinct different meals, a meat meal and a milk meal. Sorry, you will go with the milk meal first and then the meat meal, because you can't have you can't have milk after meat. Well, you have to wait 6 hours, so that's what you do. Yes?
That wasn't the story I was taught. I was taught that we have the milk meal to remember that we were at Mount Sinai, and before we were like every other people in the world, but at Mount Sinai we received the Torah and received the laws from Shkita, that we had that time.
That's another reason. That's certainly another reason. So there's multiple reasons. In fact, the word chalav, what's the numerical value of the word chalav? Which means dairy, milk. Chalav. Ches 8, Lamed 30, Beis is 2. How many days was Moshe at Mount Sinai? 40. So that's another symbolism. There's lots of symbolisms. We could go through all of those. We could discuss it. Why it is that on Shavuos we're going to have double meal. But that's not the order of my slides. So let me go first in the order of how I made my slides, and I'll get back to that in a minute, especially because we do that more so by day than by night. Okay, but still you can do it at night and I see many shuls are doing that. At our shul in the past we've had milchik meals at night. I just decided to do a fleishik meal this year, but let's first talk about all night study. This all night at Sinai is a Shavuot lecture series, and our sages described that the day we received the Torah as a betrothal, the marriage ceremony between God and ourselves. So in the hours leading up to the wedding, what does a bride usually do? You stay awake. You're excited, right? The bride's entourage, they beautify, they adorn her so that she'll look her best for her groom, her wedding day. She finally gets to celebrate. So similarly, we spend the hours before we will once again receive the Torah. We are so excited we can't go to sleep. We prepare for the Torah. How? By studying all night in preparation for it. Now that's one answer. But there is a medrash that says that the night before God gave us the Torah, our ancestors slept. In fact, they slept too deeply that when God arrived to give them the Torah, they were still asleep, according to the medrash. So that's not the way you prepare to receive the Torah. And therefore, our sages tell us, we stay awake a whole night, and it's called Tikkun Leil Shavuos. The rectification on the night of Shavuos, to rectify the fact that our ancestors stayed awake that whole night before. So what do? We stay up. And what do we read? The Tikkun Leil Shavuos. Tikkun literally means rectification. We are rectifying that our ancestors slept the night before, and we study. Now, according to the first reason that I gave, we're preparing the whole night, as the word tikkun means something else. It actually means a beautification, an adornment. Tikkunah. So it's a beautification, preparing for receiving the Torah. According to the second answer, it is a rectification for sleeping the night before. Now, many shuls are going to have different customs by us. I'm asking congregants to prepare different insights and Torah thoughts to share, so it's community-led. But there's also the book that we study through the evening called the Tikkun Leil. I want to remind you again, more important that you be at shul awake and alert to receive the Torah, to hear the 10 Commandments by day, than to stay awake through the night. So stay awake a little later than usual to rectify. If you could stay all night, because beautiful, that's the best. I always do. Take lots of coffee and you'll do that. But if you can't, stay awake till midnight. If you can't stay awake till midnight, stay awake a little later than usual without a TV or Netflix keeping you busy. But what should you do? Study Torah. You're allowed to eat and drink. It's not a problem. Eat, drink. The Tikkun Leil Shavuos, this book is comprised of the entire Torah. It has the first 3 and last 3 passages of every chapter written in the Torah, the first and last passages of each tractate in the Talmud. It has a list of all 613 mitzvahs. And it has various tracts from the Zohar. It includes Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. And it also has the first and last 3 chapters of... No, I said the first 3 left. What else does it have? It has complete books. It has, for example, the entire section of the Exodus of Egypt. And it has the entire section of the splitting of the sea. And the entire section of Matan Torah. So those, it's not just first 3 and last 3 chapters. And when we study this book throughout the night, it gives us an opportunity to scan through the entire Torah, right? The written Torah, the oral Torah, the commandments, the mystical, concealed dimension of Torah, every single aspect. And it also includes the whole book of Ruth. Because there's a custom, in fact, to read the book of Ruth in Shul on Shavuos, which I'll talk about just now. What did you want to say, Stephen?
No, I'm saying that some shuls also Tikkun Shavuot, davening,
Some shuls do that. The Chabad custom is not to do it. The Chabad custom actually is to get a little bit of rest. So what time is sunrise? It's like 6 a.m. or something. I don't know the exact time here in Joburg. And when I was in London, it was good because I spent a Shavuos in London twice or three times because my brother lived there and I studied there. So when I spent Shavuos in London, somehow London, it gets like sunrise is very early in the morning these days, 3 o'clock in the morning. That's a break because I come from New York where it's 5, 6 in the morning this time of year. And here also it's about 6 a.m. Luckily in Chabad we only start davening 9:30. So get to sleep till 8, 8:30 and then go. You could get a good 2-hour rest from sunrise till... Yeah, many shuls have an 8 minyan. I was looking this morning at the Sunny Road Kehillah. I see that they will go through the night and have an 8 minyan, which is about 5:40 a.m. Study throughout the night and then 5:40 a.m. The Rebbe encouraged that one should get a little bit of rest before davening. Otherwise, the davening, it looks like when you're exhausted. So, but the custom is to stay awake throughout the night. And in the morning in shul to read the book of Ruth. For those who are wondering, in the Chabad custom, we don't read it at night. In the morning, we do read it at night. Why the book of Ruth? There's a lot of reasons, and I thought I would give you all share about Ruth today, but it doesn't look like I'll do it. So I will instead just focus on a few ideas of why we read it. The book of Ruth tells us the story of Ruth. That's the Chabad custom. I didn't decide the Chabad traditions. It's the holy rabbis, long before I was around, have decided these. So it was based on the custom of the Arizal. Okay. Ruth was an ancestress of King David. King David was born on Shavuos and passed away on Shavuos, so it's appropriate to read his lineage, his story. She was a Moabite princess, and she sacrificed a life of luxury to live as a poor and simple convert to Judaism. We know, what was her sister's name? Pardon? Orpah. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, Naomi, goodbye, whereas Ruth cleaved to her. And she said, your God is my God, your people are my people. She suffered poverty, there was discrimination. It wasn't an easy experience coming into the Jewish fold. She was different. She came from a different past. And, oftentimes being with somebody, yesterday somebody was telling me he came to this country in 1982 when apartheid was rife here. He was Israeli. He is Israeli. He still lives here. He's here already for 40 years. He said he arrived here in 1982. And he's a wealthy businessman. He described to me that he was sitting at an executive business meeting and it happened to be one black person who was in their business with them. But the irony, you have a black partner, which is already, illegal in apartheid era, and he says when it came to sit down, the black gentleman had to sit at another table. So the Israeli guy, he hasn't told me if I could tell his name, so I won't say it, but he tells me he sat down with this black gentleman. So the Afrikaners, they said, that's highly illegal. He says, what do you mean it's highly illegal? They said, no, we could already be in trouble that we have him in part of a business. Don't forget, this is a good 12 years before BBBE or whatever it's called, right? So he said, listen, I'm sitting here with him. And he said he put his foot down already then that they knew what kind of partner he's going to be in this business. First of all, that everyone's an equal partner here. And secondly, I will do things my way. He told me, and today they're still in partnership. He said it's 40 years later, and they're all in this partnership together. Well, he said, actually, no, the only two people who are still in the partnership is him and the black gentleman. He said all the other Afrikaner guys, they're all gone from the business. It's only them two are still in this partnership. And he's a very successful businessman. And I have no doubt that part of his success is certainly attributed to the fact that, his care and sensitivity. And then it was illegal. But he says, what do you think? If it's illegal to do this, what else? We Jews have experienced discrimination, but it happens sometimes, and unfortunately. And there's no doubt that there are racists amongst us too, which is wrong. And maybe that's why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos to tell us that just as Ruth was a convert to Judaism, there should be no discrimination. The Torah numerous times tells us how to treat a convert with greater sense. Why would the Torah tell us how to treat a convert so many times? Because maybe it's natural inclination that when somebody's different than you treat them differently. And maybe the Torah is telling us not to do that over and over again. And because Ruth was a convert to Judaism, we are all converts to Judaism because on Shavuos, we became the Jewish people when God gave us the Torah. So, yes, it was difficult for her, and embracing Torah could sometimes have its challenges and difficulties, like we discussed before. Keeping Shabbos, keeping Yom Tov, all that comes with difficulties, and it's not easy. But we have to remember that just as Ruth was sacrificed for her Judaism, we too have to be willing to sacrifice. And she merited to have a grandson who would be King David. When we sacrifice for God, God will provide for our needs. So it's appropriate that we read this book on Shavuos, remind ourselves. It also describes the harvest, which is what you asked about before. When Boaz, what was Boaz before he met Ruth, by the way? Ruthless. So, when Boaz met Ruth and noticed her piety, which was described in the book as in the harvest season, and since Shavuos is the harvest holiday, we also read it. That's another reason. What other reasons anyone could tell me? I'm sure there's other reasons that I've mentioned in previous years that I'm not remembering today. Pardon? Kindness to a widow. Yes, the Torah emphasizes that as well. Okay, so there's lots of elements of why we read it on Shavuos, and so that's all to be included in, of course, in the prayers. There's going to be Hallel, there's reading the Ten Commandments, and let's talk a little bit about Hallel, because we said Hallel yesterday, and we're going to say it again on Yom Tov. It's worthwhile to recall some of the significance of Hallel. Hallel is a blessing. We thank God for the miracles of life. Every day is a gift, right? Every breath is a miracle. And we sing God's praises for these miracles every single day. But certainly when it comes to times of joy and salvation, when we experience an extra measure of God's love and protection, we gather as a community to sing God's praises. Now usually we're going to sing it on a Yom Tov, like when God saved us on Pesach and Chanukah, right? What salvation did we experience on Shavuos? So it's not only about salvation and miracles, but also the fact that God gave us this Torah. So we acknowledge that every detail in our lives is orchestrated by our loving Father in heaven for purposes that are absolutely good. And therefore on Shavuos, it's such a joyous and uplifting festival when we became the Jewish people, when God gave us the Torah. So it stimulates feelings of love and gratitude that are experienced both personally as well as collectively. So we sing these praises of God and we appreciate the blessings that God gives us. Just as praising somebody awakens a desire within that person, a positive, what would you call it? A positive camaraderie, feelings of love between each other. Well, God delights in our prayers. And when we sing Hashem's prayers, such as the Hallel, our sages tell us that Hashem is special feelings of ecstatic joy. And God wants to reciprocate to us. So remember that it's true, God doesn't need our prayers. We need to praise Hashem. And it deepens our bond. It fans the flames of our love. And most importantly, it brings to the surface our feelings of gratitude to Hashem for all the bountiful gifts that Hashem gives us. So we sing Hallel as part of our prayers. We also say Musaf. Musaf is an additional prayer that's said on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So don't forget to say the prayers. Reminds me of a boat that was going through a terrible storm they were about to experience. It was tumultuous. They didn't know what's going to be. And the captain asked if anyone on this boat knows how to pray. So one guy on the ship says, yes, I'm a rabbi, I know how to pray. The rabbi says, thank God, because we are one life jacket short. You pray while we... Okay, another custom that's not in the Chabad tradition also is akdamas. Are you familiar with akdamas? Akdamas milim v'suya. Okay, there's going to be akdamas after Hallel before reading the Torah. Many communities chant this beautiful, elaborate prayer, very poetically written, called akdamas. It is an ode to Hashem. And it is read responsively with the chazan. Okay, the Chazan reads the first two stanzas, and the congregation responds with the following two stanzas. So it's responsive in that sense, and it is beautifully poetic. It is sung to a very special tune. It's written in Aramaic, and it praises Hashem's greatness that transcends all description. And it goes on to describe the myriads of angels that God created and the way which they praise Hashem. And it proclaims our allegiance to God and none other. And it concludes with a description of all the miraculous events that will take place with the coming of Mashiach. So the Akdamas, in fact, there's a beautiful story about the Akdamas. I'm not going to be able to tell it to you today, but I encourage you to read the story. It's also written in a, what do you call that, an acrostic, right? The first two lines begin with the letter Aleph, and the next two go with the letter Beis, etc. And he embedded his own name in the first letter of the final 46 lines. And he also included a prayer that he be strong and courageous and grow in the Torah and good deeds, which of course we include in our prayer when we sing the Akdamas as well. And it has a beautiful tune. Da 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 dee da 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 da. So as you know, all prayers in Judaism all have their specific times. Shacharis has its particular prayer, just as Friday night has its particular prayer. And Musaf has its specific one. And then there's one's particular for Rosh Chodesh. And there's one's particular for Mincha. And there's one's particular to the high holidays. And there are those particular to each holiday. So you just have to know. I'm reminded, Evelyn Green always tells me this story of a chazan at the Great Wolmeren Street Shul who didn't know the prayer, and the chazan and the choir had to try to get him back in. So Cantor Beer, who was my teacher at Yeshiva University, he once told me the story of, the Ne'ilah has a particular prayer, tune. On the high holidays, every prayer has its tune. And if you're the chazan, you better know those tunes. And the chazan gets up there and he makes up the tune. He's butchering it. So this lady starts singing down in Yiddish from the Weibershul. She goes, I'm now forgetting it. As du weißt nicht, und du kennst nicht, was tust du für ein Amut? Ay, 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 ay. That's not called Nidre, it is Ne'ilah. Right, Ne'ilah. Ashrei yoishvei veisecha yalelucha sena. So you have to know the right tune for each prayer. And Akdamas has that particular tune that we were just doing. Okay, it's getting late and there's a delicious lunch waiting for you. Let's just go through a few more important points. The picture on the screen is of a Aron Kodesh. Let's talk about taking the Torah out. We know that on Shavuos, God gave us the Torah 3,334 years ago. If you're watching this in 10 years from now, then it's 3,344 years ago. Okay, or whenever you'll watch it, we're now in the year 5782, and God gave us the Torah in the year 2448, so do the maths. And each year at Shavuos, we are receiving the Torah anew. So, that is what we're doing on Shavuos, and therefore the most important thing you can do on Shavuos is come to hear the Torah. Hear the reading of the Ten Commandments. When the Chazan, the Baal Koreh, will be reading the Ten Commandments, there is a specific tune that it is read with. Right? And he's going to go, Anoichi. First he's going to raise his voice. Okay? There's going to be total focus, concentration. And he reads it with passion and zeal. So, when you are hearing the Torah reading, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzesicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeis Avodim. He's going to read it with a special tune that is reserved specifically for the reading of the Ten Commandments on Shavuos. As it is read, you should visualize yourself standing there at Mount Sinai, that you're seeing the thunder and the lightning and hearing God's voice intone the commandments. That's why it's being read in this specific tune. And after we read the commandments, there is this joy that grips us. We celebrate that we are tapping into that moment when God gave us the Torah.
We got the first two from Moshe.
The first two God said, and the rest of the Moshe Rabbeinu intoned. So remember,
Did I not hear Hashem giving it to Moshe from sleep?
no, they couldn't handle hearing God's voice. It was too much for them.
They were switched off.
Yeah. But remember, that's the most important thing, is to be in shul to hear the Ten Commandments. And especially the little ones. The little children. Because, as we discussed yesterday, when God asked for guarantors who will keep the Torah, it wasn't the senior citizens. Yes, the elderly are very important. You're the ones who teach us. But it's important that the children be there as well. So make sure that the children are there, that the children are present, and that they are there to hear the reading of the Ten Commandments in shul. And good ways of keeping the kids involved is bribery and corruption. Give them treats. Let them be involved in it. Let them be there. Let the kids be part of this celebration of hearing the reading of the Ten Commandments in shul on Shavuos. Every shul's different, especially those shuls that are going to be staying up all night Saturday night. Those shuls are going to be doing it early, like 5:40 is Shacharis. I think I saw Sunny Road said they're reading the Ten Commandments about 6:30 in the morning or earlier. Right? They're praying at 5:40. That means they're going to be doing the Ten Commandments about 6:30 or so. At my shul, we're doing it at 10:30. 10 Commandments at 10:30. Okay? After that, you want to have your ice cream. But wait, not yet. There's Musaf first. What's the cow's favorite part of the davening? Musaf. Okay, and we're going to have milchigs. So we have to talk about the Musaf and the milchigs. I didn't get to that yet. Okay, so Musaf, very important. You talk about the additional sacrifices that were offered in the temple on Shavuos, on a Yom Tov. And of course, because we can no longer offer those sacrifices today, we don't have a temple. So we mention them in the Musaf prayer. And as we say in the prayer, I can't hold myself back. Because we're unable to not prostrate ourselves before you in the temple. We do this how? By reading the prayers as we used to offer them. Chag HaMatzos uVechag HaShavuos. Okay, so you get a little taste of what the Musaf prayer sounds like, what it should sound like. We refer to the fact that in the temple, where the divine presence was palpable, we felt completely nullified before Hashem. And since the temple was destroyed, that's no longer present. So we today offer the sacrifice. We today say the prayers instead, and therefore it's important that we say this prayer. And after the Musaf is where we'll talk about the dairy dishes. Let's talk about that. With that, we'll conclude.
Before Musaf starts and after Torah reading.
Yes.
Before that, the
Interesting. Chabad doesn't do it, so I'm not certain. But yes, many communities do it. And there are various tunes. The tune I was taught at the Yeshiva University was Kakeli V'chai Gali. What's your tune? There's a different one. I think there's a different one for Pesach, a different one for Shavuos.
No, we used the same one for the Shalosh Regalim.
Oh, same one for all Shalosh Regalim. Okay, yes. So most likely you will sing Kakeli as well. But to check for certain. Okay, anyways, that's what we do. Yes. All right, let's conclude with dairy dishes on Shavuos because that's what you asked about. And since I put it in my slide for lunch, because I usually do it at lunchtime. So, it's we said that on Yom Tov, generally speaking, you eat meat, unless you're vegan or vegetarian or allergic to it, or you get gout. Well, you can do it anyways and then suffer. Okay, so
From the meat.
yeah, it's from the meat, right? But I don't know what it is. Anyways, the point is that on Shavuos we eat 2 separate meals. Let's first talk about how, and then we'll talk about the why. I mean, we touched on the why already, but just important, halachically speaking, although you can eat meat right after milk, some people have a custom of waiting a full hour. Secondly, you can't just go from one to the other. You have to make sure to rinse your mouth out and your hands. If your hands touched cheesecake 2 minutes ago, don't go start touching the schnitzel now. Wash it, sanitize in between. You also have to use different dishes and different tablecloth, okay? Otherwise, yeah. Okay, you also have to wait, according to many customs, an hour. Now the reasons, as discussed, number one is when we were given the Torah on Shavuos, we became obligated to keep the laws of kosher. As Miriam said before, the meat that was prepared before would not have been kosher because they didn't have the laws of shechita yet. So therefore, in order to commemorate learning the laws of kosher and Shavuos, we say, well, especially if it was on a Shabbos, according to many sources, they were unable to slaughter new animals on Shabbos. So they had to eat dairy that Shabbos. That's one reason that is discussed. The dairy and meat reminds us, as Aubrey mentioned, about the 2-loaf bread offering, the Shnei HaLechem, that was brought on Shavuos day, as is mentioned in the prayers. And so it reminds us of the 2, and how do you have 2 meals? Well, you can eat 2 meat meals, nothing wrong with that. Or you can emphasize it, you can illustrate, you can demonstrate that it's 2 separate meals by having one that's meat and having one that's the one that's milk and one that's meat. Having the milk before the meat. Kabbalistically speaking, milk represents chesed, meat represents gevura. In life, you need to have the balance of both chesed, loving kindness, and gevura, which is discipline. But the rule of Shavuos is that God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. And that tells us that Tata Gavar, the law when it comes to kosher, is that if you're cooking, you were talking about Batal B'Shishim before. When something is nullified, how is it nullified? If meat and milk can cook together. It's like a little bit of a complicated aspect. I'll have to just briefly tell it to you, but I love this concept. Okay, you ready for something deep to conclude today with? That is, that the law of kashrut is tata'a gavar. How do you know if something's cooking? The bottom one is dominant. The Torah prohibits milk and meat being cooked together. If it's not cooked together, it's not biblically forbidden. So technically speaking, again, don't do this, don't try this at home, but technically speaking, a slice of cheese and a slice of cold turkey together are not the prohibition of cooking milk and meat together. Don't do it, because we still don't do it. The sages forbid it. But the Torah's prohibition of milk and meat is cooked together. The verse in the Torah is Lo savashel gedi b'chalev imay, not to cook a kid in its mother's milk. It's said 3 times, which tells us don't cook it together. Don't eat milk and meat that was cooked together. So not only can't you not eat it, you also can't cook it. A Jew cannot be a chef at McDonald's cooking up cheeseburgers on Pesach or any other time of the year. And the third thing is you can't even benefit from it. So now the question is how Jews own franchises in such places. Maybe the fact is because they're not the ones cooking it together. And the prohibition is only for Jews, not for Gentiles.
But then how can you benefit if you're under person? You should close the doors of food.
Now there are ways there's loopholes. You have to understand, you have to know Jewish law.
What can it be with the store?
If you pay the right price. Okay, now jokes aside, here's a deep mystical idea to conclude with. The idea is, the Gemara discusses this and says, if hot milk goes into cold meat, is that considered cooking? No. If cold meat and cold milk touch each other, it's also not cooking. Only if it is something on a fire is it considered cooking. So if the bottom one is hot, that's considered cooking. So first of all, we have to understand what means cooking. But that rule is called Tata'a Gavar, the bottom is dominant. Now, the Medrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu went up on high to receive the Torah from God at Mount Sinai. He went up to the heavens, and the angels see a corporeal human being amongst them, and they turn to God and they say, Ma yoladish b'neinu, what is this Homo sapien doing amongst us? God says, Moses, Jews are good lawyers. Why don't you defend yourself? They knew that Moshe is coming to receive the Torah Mount Sinai. They said to God, how could you give this Torah to these Jews? They are sinners. Human beings sin. So Moshe says, hold on, you angels. Let's look at the commandments. Let's look at these laws. What does it say in them? Don't steal. Do you angels have the inclination of theft? Don't kill. Other than the angel of death, do any of you have that urge? Don't commit adultery. Do you ever cheat? Observe Shabbos. Are these laws relevant to angels? Honor your parents. Do you have parents to honor? Etc., etc. Moshe defended them. And then Moshe comes to the laws of kosher. And boy, did he challenge them. Remember when the angels visited Avram Avinu in his tent? And what did Sarah prepare for them? First, it says she gave them milk, cheese products. Then she gave them tongue. Sounds like a cappuccino and a cheeseburger to me. So the Alter Rebbe in one of his discourses explains this concept. The idea that meat represents gevura, discipline, and milk represents chesed, serenity, kindness. You look at the very nature of milk, it comes from the mammary glands of a woman or a female in the animal kingdom. It's nurturing. And the idea that the mammary glands don't get diminished the more a mother nurses her child, whether human or animal, the more it is replenished. The more charity, the more kindness we do with others, the more God gives us. That's the concept of milk. Meat, on the other hand, is red, and it's rough. It's symbolic of gevura, of severity. In life, if we say Ilah Gava, that the Torah belongs in heaven, then we're saying that the world needs to have more of the attribute of discipline. But if we say Chesed is first, now think about it. If I eat the meat first, which is Gevura, and right away consume milk, and the law is Tatav, that the bottom is dominant, then I'm saying Gevura should overpower the Chesed. But if I have the Chesed, the milk first, then that is the bottom dominant, then I can have meat right away. And Moshe Rabbeinu was able to convince the angels to allow the Torah to be given to earth. Tata'a gavar, the Torah belongs on earth. Okay, that's just a side note. So the milk also reminds us that the Torah is compared to milk and honey, as is written in other places. And that is another idea, and there's many other concepts, but it's time to conclude. Any questions before we go? Okay, ladies and gents, have a beautiful, lovely Leka Yom Tov. Don't forget there's a second day and Shabbos. Don't forget to celebrate. And, Bikurim, one last thing. Did I talk about Bikurim yet? Yes? Okay, good. Done. Zaykazant, everybody. Have a good Yom Tov.